The first lie they told about my husband wasn't spoken at his funeral, it was spoken before the flowers had even begun to wilt. According to Richard Collins, the family's polished financial advisor, my husband had made his intentions perfectly clear. His estate, he announced, would remain with the Carter family. I wasn't part of that family anymore, not in their eyes. The words echoed through the reception hall while crystal glasses clinked and expensive perfume drifted through the air. I stood beside a portrait of the man I had loved for 9 years, wearing the black dress he once said made me look unstoppable inside. Grief weighed more than stone outside. I looked calm. People often mistake silence for weakness. I learned years ago that silence gives other people room to reveal exactly who they are. Richard smiled as though he had already won. My father-in-law adjusted his tailored suit and cleared his throat. Daniel understood legacy, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Our family built everything we have. He knew where it belonged. Several relatives nodded without hesitation. No one asked what Daniel would have wanted for me. No one asked how I was surviving the worst day of my life. My mother-in-law walked toward me with perfectly practiced sympathy. I know this is difficult, she whispered, but you'll recover. You're young. You'll find another life, as if the one we built together had been temporary, as if love could be replaced like furniture. Behind her, my brother-in-law Marcus laughed under his breath. I always knew she married above her station. A few people pretended not to hear, others smiled politely. Neither response surprised me. I had spent years being reminded that my darker skin somehow made me less refined, less elegant, less worthy of carrying the Carter name. They never said it directly in public. They didn't have to. It lived inside every compliment they gave someone else, every comparison, every invitation that somehow forgot my name. Richard folded a leather portfolio beneath his arm. The estate documents are very straightforward, he announced. Mrs. Carter receives no controlling interest in Carter Holdings. He paused for effect. The business remains exactly where Mr. Carter intended. They believed him. They believed everything. If you've ever watched someone smile while standing on quicksand, you already know what comes next, because appearances have a strange way of hiding the truth. If stories about betrayal, justice, and quiet strength speak to you, stay with me until the end. Sometimes the loudest victory begins with absolute silence. I lowered my eyes, not because I was defeated, but because grief deserved more attention than their performance. They mistook composure for surrender. They had absolutely no idea how wrong they were. After the final guests disappeared into waiting cars, I drove home alone. The house felt painfully quiet. Daniel's coffee mug still rested beside the kitchen sink. His jacket still hung near the front door. The silence hurt more than any insult. I walked slowly through each room, breathing in the fading scent of cedarwood cologne that still lingered in the hallway. Then I noticed something resting on the entry table, a cream-colored envelope, heavy, unopened. My name was written across the front in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Beneath it was a smaller note from his attorney, only 6 words: open exactly 30 days after my death. I stared at the envelope without touching it. Whatever Daniel had left behind wasn't meant for today. It was meant for the day everyone believed I had nothing, and somehow that realization frightened me even more than losing him. 30 days passed exactly the way grief always does, slow enough to feel every hour, yet somehow fast enough to leave me wondering where the time had gone. On the morning of the 30th day, the envelope still rested where I had placed it, inside my desk drawer. I had looked at it countless times without opening it. Daniel had trusted me to wait, and honoring that request became the only promise I still knew how to keep. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. I broke the seal with careful hands. Inside was a single letter: Naomi, if you're reading this, someone has already convinced you that I left you with nothing. Don't believe them. Meet Charles Bennett at 10 o'clock a.m. He knows everything. My heart slowed instead of racing. Daniel had never wasted words. At exactly 10 o'clock, I stepped into a quiet law office overlooking the city, shelves lined with worn Legal books stretched across the walls. Behind a polished oak desk sat an older man whose expression carried the weight of decades spent protecting clients from disasters they never saw coming. "You must be Naomi," he said gently. "I am." He nodded. "Once I was Daniel's corporate attorney for 15 years. During the last 3 I became something more." He opened a locked briefcase and removed several thick folders. Every page carried signatures, trust seals, banking certifications, and legal notations. "This is a confidential, irrevocable trust," he explained. "Daniel created it outside the family structure. You are the sole beneficiary." I stared at the documents without speaking. Then he slid another page toward me. Across the bottom was a number that made me stop breathing for a moment. 7724891342. I looked up. "There has to be some mistake there, isn't?" Charles folded his hands. "Daniel discovered irregular transfers years ago. Millions were quietly moved through offshore entities controlled by people he believed he could trust." One name appeared again and again: Richard Collins, the family's respected financial advisor. Charles' voice remained calm. "Daniel didn't merely suspect fraud. He documented it." He reached into the briefcase once more and placed a small encrypted flash drive beside the folders. "Everything is here." Outside the office window, traffic moved as though nothing extraordinary had happened inside. My entire understanding of my marriage changed. Daniel hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me. And for the first time since his funeral, grief made room for something else: purpose. At exactly 6:42 p.m., my car stopped beneath the grand entrance of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. The building shimmered beneath hundreds of warm lights, its marble columns reflecting the last traces of the evening sun. Valets hurried between luxury cars, while photographers documented the arrival of executives, philanthropists, judges, and investors attending the Carter Foundation charity gala. I stepped onto the pavement wearing a tailored black suit that Daniel once called my armor. Tonight it felt exactly that way. Every button fastened with purpose, every step measured. Grief had shaped me, but strategy now carried me forward. No one greeted me. Several guests noticed me immediately, then exchanged curious glances before looking away. Word had traveled quickly after Daniel's funeral. Most believed I had been left with nothing. Others believed I would quietly disappear from the city's business circles. They had absolutely no idea why I had come. Inside, soft piano music floated through the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished tables. Dressed in white linen waiters moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne. Conversations blended into a constant hum of wealth and influence. I recognized nearly every face: federal judges, corporate attorneys, investment partners, university trustees, community leaders whose signatures could change the direction of million-dollar projects. Exactly the audience I needed. Richard Collins stood near the center of the ballroom, laughing comfortably with my father-in-law. His custom tuxedo fit perfectly. Confidence radiated from him as naturally as breathing. He believed he controlled every financial decision surrounding the Carter family. My arrival interrupted their conversation. Richard smiled, not kindly, the smile of someone convinced victory had already been secured. "Naomi," he called loudly enough for nearby guests to hear him. "Surprised you received an invitation." A few conversations stopped. My father-in-law folded his arms, but said nothing. I simply met Richard's eyes. Silence. He mistook it for uncertainty. "I suppose old habits are difficult to break," Richard continued. "Some people never learn when a chapter has ended." Several guests shifted awkwardly. Others waited. They expected me to defend myself. I didn't. Silence often forces arrogance to keep talking. Richard accepted the invitation. "I've always admired confidence," he said, "although confidence without qualifications usually becomes embarrassment." A few restrained laughs drifted across the room. He wasn't finished. "I handled Daniel's financial affairs for years. Believe me, if he thought you belonged in those boardrooms, you would still be sitting in one." His words echoed through the ballroom. I felt every eye settle on me. Inside, I remembered something Charles Bennett had told me during our final meeting: the truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs the right audience. So I remained still. Richard frowned almost imperceptibly. What he didn't know was that every sentence he spoke was becoming part of the evidence. One of the investors approached carefully. Mrs. Carter, he asked politely, "Is there anything you'd like to say?" I smiled. "Not yet, only 2 words. Nothing more." The answer seemed to unsettle Richard far more than any argument could have. He adjusted his cufflinks. "I should also warn everyone present," he announced, raising his voice. "Again, false accusations against financial professionals carry very serious legal consequences. Defamation lawsuits are expensive." Threats, exactly as expected. Several attorneys exchanged quick glances. My silence remained unchanged. Richard's confidence began showing its first crack. People who tell the truth rarely become uncomfortable with silence. People hiding secrets almost always do. Across the ballroom, I noticed Charles Bennett enter quietly through a side door. He carried a slim leather briefcase and gave me the slightest nod. Everything was ready. Everything had been planned weeks earlier. The projection screen behind the charity stage still displayed photographs celebrating the foundation's scholarship recipients, young students whose futures depended on honest stewardship of charitable funds. Looking at those smiling faces strengthened my resolve. This was never only about me, it was about everyone harmed by greed, hidden behind polished speeches and expensive suits. Richard looked toward me once more. "If you're planning something," he said coldly, "I'd advise you to reconsider." I finally answered. I already did. His expression changed only for a second, but I saw a doubt. The first crack in the mask. Charles stopped beside me and quietly placed a small black flash drive into my hand. It felt surprisingly light for something capable of destroying an empire. I closed my fingers around it without saying a word. Across the ballroom, Richard's smile slowly disappeared. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid. The room became so quiet that I could hear the projector's cooling fan. No one moved, no one spoke. The final recording filled the ballroom with Daniel's calm voice. "If you're hearing this, it means Richard believed he could bury the truth with me." Every face turned toward the screen. Richard didn't. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. As the recording continued, Daniel calmly described unauthorized transfers, forged approvals, shell companies, and secret meetings. Every statement matched the financial records already displayed before the audience. There was no dramatic accusation, only facts, dates, signatures, and account numbers. Richard swallowed hard. "I can explain," he whispered, but no one asked him to. Sometimes silence becomes the strongest verdict. Within minutes, federal investigators entered the ballroom carrying sealed folders. Their badges flashed beneath the crystal chandeliers. One agent approached Richard. "Mr. Collins, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding conspiracy wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Richard finally looked at me. The confidence that had carried him through the evening had disappeared. "I was protecting the company," he said. His own words betrayed him. "So you admit you authorized the transfers?" The question came from an investigator. Richard froze. Then he nodded almost instinctively. The room seemed to exhale all at once. He had spent years convincing everyone he was the smartest man in every room. In the end, he became the prosecution's strongest witness. Across the ballroom, my father-in-law slowly lowered himself into a chair. His influence had depended on reputation. Without it, people quietly walked away. Investors ended conversations. Board members avoided eye contact. Phones began ringing. The empire he had spent decades protecting was collapsing one decision at a time. My mother-in-law looked around desperately for familiar faces. Earlier that evening, she had been surrounded by admirers. Now she stood alone. No one wanted to share photographs with scandal. No one wanted to be associated with corruption. My brother-in-law tried leaving through a side entrance before investigators stopped him for questioning about documents carrying his signature. For the first time in years, his family name offered no protection. I watched everything unfold without satisfaction. Victory never erased grief. Daniel was still gone. No courtroom investigation or financial recovery could change that. Weeks later, the trust officially transferred under court supervision. The balance remained exactly as Daniel had protected it. 772489134. People expected me to celebrate. Instead, I opened another folder. This one contained planned scholarship funds for students whose opportunities had disappeared because charitable money had been stolen, investment programs supporting Black-owned businesses denied access to capital, community legal clinics helping families protect generational wealth through proper estate planning. Every signature felt like another promise kept. Daniel had preserved more than money, he had preserved choice. Months later, I visited his favorite park. Just before sunset, the breeze carried the familiar scent of pine. After a light rain, children laughed nearby. Life continued. I placed fresh flowers beneath the old oak tree where we had once planned our future together. I finished what you started, I said quietly. For the first time since losing him, the silence no longer felt empty, it felt peaceful. If my story leaves you with anything, let it be this: people will underestimate you because of your background, your appearance, your grief, or your silence. Let them. Character does not announce itself, it reveals itself over time. Real strength is not measured by how loudly you fight, it's measured by how faithfully you protect your values when everyone expects you to surrender them. The people who betrayed me believed they had taken everything. They never realized the most valuable thing I possessed could never be stolen: my dignity, my purpose, my future. And I finally understood the lesson Daniel had been trying to leave behind all along. The greatest revenge is not taking back what they stole, it's becoming someone they can never control again.